Hey guys, this is Tyler here. It is January 10th here in Estonia, and I'm going to discuss with everyone about the good, the bad, and the ugly of Denmark. Denmark, of course, is a Scandinavian country. Like other Nordic countries, it's notorious for high tax rates, for relatively high standards of living. Also, it has recently had pretty high rates of immigration, say in the past 30 plus years, and these have all been big influencers on the country as a whole. And it's also noteworthy that they follow a model that's very akin to other Nordic and Scandinavian countries, which is a kind of village mentality. It's a very high tax system, but just remember that a lot of those taxes go back to the people some way. They are not a positive aspect of the country, but compared to like the US and Canada, the taxes do actually fund a lot of their own countries, and they don't get sent out to fund global conflicts and other large-scale projects in foreign countries like we see in the US and Canada. So Denmark, like its other Nordic neighbors, has been very spoken about worldwide as being this supposedly very happy country. And whether that's true, it depends on the person. I can't say here. I've never lived in Denmark. I think like everywhere, there's happy people and unhappy people everywhere you go. I think the overall level of contentment, though, is probably a little higher in country like Denmark compared to in places like the US and Canada. I think that not everyone, of course, is content, but I think it's a little more higher level of contentment than we see elsewhere. And remember, contentment doesn't necessarily mean happiness here. There's a big difference. And as I stated in the Sweden video, when the studies are done on happiness, I think they conflate happiness with like contentment, with economic, with personal contentment, rather than actual happiness in the like Anglo sense. This is my suspicion. I have to do more research on this. So now during the 1990s, Denmark, which is a country of about 5.6 million people, very small country. Denmark was a country that got invaded by a large number of immigrants. From 1980s to early 2000s was the highest influx of immigrants. It amounted to around 200,000 people. And when you think of a country of this size, this was a massive influx of immigrants like they had never experienced before. And this had a big impact on the country. They obviously are known for having this comprehensive welfare, a labor market that there's many lower paying jobs that are hard to be filled by Danes that immigrants will do, knowing that they can also rely on subsidy benefits and all forms of welfare. And many of these immigrants, of course, realize this. Now, whether this translates in real life for these immigrants to be actually happy is a different story. It is noteworthy that in recent times, if we look at immigration trends, they continued very high up until a few years ago. And then there's been a lot of pushback by Danes. They are tired of having so many immigrants, and they certainly have taken actual steps to reduce the issue. Now, understand how this ties into the country and tax system, because a lot of these immigrants obviously usually rely heavily on taxes, and this is the percentages of them that rely on taxes is typically a lot higher than of the native population there, and this is how it ties in. The high taxes then create a more unhospitable system for men of that society. It makes it more unfavorable for them to want to build their lives there to help grow the Danish economy, and that's where this area ties in. We look at a place like Germany, who also had a similar trend. In Germany, obviously, was right next to Denmark. It's to the south of Denmark, had very similar situation. The difference with Denmark is just on a smaller scale. Muslim population obviously has grown quite a bit in recent years in Denmark. This has produced a mix of opinions. Recently, it's really made a lot of Danes more negative about this issue. And what actually happened is that just a couple of years ago, they decided to cut social benefits to the wave of refugees that came into Denmark starting about 5 to 8 years ago. When all the refugees were coming into Europe, they decided to cut them by 45%. They just decided they were not going to have anything to do with it. remember that the EU is like a confederation. They can do this type of thing, and this isn't like the US. Denmark can opt out of this type of thing by how the law is written. And also remember, Denmark's a partial member, not a full member of the EU, which gives them a little more freedom with these matters. And what actually happened is that when the wave of these people are leaving their countries, like Lebanon and Jordan, they were publishing these like ads in newspapers, those countries and other Middle Eastern countries, warning them not to come to Denmark to resettle because they were not going to agree with what's known as the EU redistribution agreement. And that meant that if they came there and they applied for benefits, essentially they wouldn't get any benefits. And at some point they could even be deported. There was an asylum austerity law with support from the Social Democrats, and they said that it would permit police to search asylum seekers and confiscate cash and valuables above a certain threshold, 10,000 kroner, or about $1,500, to pay for their accommodations. It would make it much more difficult for them to enter the workforce and to remain in the country. Essentially, the Danes have gotten fed up with having large influx of immigrants in their country. And this was the final wave and the final straw for the Danes to be like, we've had it with this system. And so this is where we diverge from other countries like we've discussed, such as Sweden or Germany or France, where in general overall acceptance of these people's higher. How this plays into Denmark, Danes truthfully want to keep Denmark by and far Danes. And this is really common. I see the same thing here in Estonia. I think a lot of them early on didn't know what to expect of large wave of immigrants. I think some of them too put on a false front. They embraced them or acted like they did, but over time realized the problems and that it would continue to erode their political system, and it would just increase the already high rate, their tax rates that the Danes have to pay. And Denmark's kind of a unique player in Scandinavia. It's really a country of its own. The Danes have a country, I think, that's overall the national pride is quite high, and they've certainly had a lot more pushback against some of the liberal policies that have became very heavy in other Scandinavian/Nordic countries. And while it doesn't seem necessarily a big deal here, it has had an impact, I think. It's worth noting, for example, in Denmark, that level of feminism is actually not as high as other Scandinavian countries. It's there. A recent survey, 1 in 6 females classified as feminist, or 1 in 6 Danes classified as feminist. And if you look at the breakdown of the male to female, it was really small percentage of men that supported this. With women, it was sizably larger, but it was still not nearly as big as other European countries. I think the rate is actually significantly higher in approval here in Estonia than in Denmark. And it's interesting, like in America, the rate of approval of feminism was, of course, higher at 26% of white females. Now, of black females in America was over 46%, and also very high for Latinas, Hispanics, very high. And so there's definitely a demographic thing here that plays into those statistics. With that being said, though, there still are, of course, many issues for common men in the dating environment in Denmark. And I recently read on MGTOW.com, there was a posting by a Danish guy. I can post his link under the video here below. He was discussing his situation in Denmark, and one of the things that common themes I think I noticed there is the looks certainly play a big role, because the women, of course, like other places, they don't really need a provider man in this country. The women are very self-sufficient, and it's the same common theme that the men are just very complimentary, and they can pull them along, the woman, without really respecting them. And this guy, though, was discussing, he he rated himself as an ugly man. I don't know if this was the only issue, and he actually ended up spending over 8,000 euros on self-improvement. He did courses, among other things, and over a 2-year period, and eventually he came to the conclusion it wasn't worth the time and effort, and he just stopped and kind of just went his own way. Obviously, I haven't met the guy. I don't know him. You guys are anonymous. I can't see what you guys look like. I don't know like what your day-to-day lives look like. I don't know anything, honestly. So it's very hard for me to get like a full gauge on these situations. I only know what I read, and I have to interpret it. It does seem like maybe some of the common issues we see in other Scandinavian countries, that novelty is highly valued in Scandinavia. And one thing though I will note, in Denmark, what I consistently have found, the need to be a clown or entertainer doesn't seem as much so as like in maybe in other Northern European countries. It seems like they do, women actually resent that to a degree. And I think you're better off being a little more base as a guy. For a guy maybe who didn't consider themselves as much of an entertainer, this might be a better place to be. I in some ways kind of reminds me a bit of Estonia. Being showy, being flashy actually doesn't necessarily reside well with the women there. I read actually in another article that like flashing your blank can actually do the opposite with Danes. So you might actually be better off just looking like a very like normal guy. It seems like more the virtue signaling / being kind of a helper, among other things. This is more beneficial, especially being like virtue signaling about some way that you're benefiting a society or benefiting another country, whatever it may be. One of the guys actually had said that if you work for like a petroleum company as an engineer, you don't tell them how you're making big bucks in that job. You tell them how you're trying to implement alternative energy solutions working in that area or something. It's something along those lines. Because this is another big thing about Denmark is they do, like I stated before, they have a lot of focus on these alternative energy solutions and taxes. This is a very common thing spread out along all of the EU. This whole alternative energy agenda is so big, like solar, wind, even like algae energy. All of these alternative energy forms there's big EU bucks to be found, and that may be one of the reasons I think some of these countries push it so much is to try to get some of those EU bucks. But dating's a little more base in this sense compared to, I think, a country like Germany, which is to the south. I think that's a little more showy of a culture where you would have to flash more, and it would go further. In Denmark, I think it's truly more egalitarian based, and there are other things there that guys can show that will help them. But I think just like other small countries like Estonia, the spectrum of difference is relatively small. And I think this is the main issue with dating or relationships, whether it's for Danish or foreign men. If you don't fit within a certain spectrum of guy, it's hard. I mean, this is a common thread in all the small countries. There's limited personality difference, and there's a limited range of preference. So if you don't fit that profile, it can be very challenging. In like other Nordic countries, marriage is not a fast in their country. There's lots of kids being born in unwed households, which is an issue. Long term, it's an issue because it just continues to perpetuate the welfare state and to encourage people to just rely on public handouts and have their kids raised by the state, by the country. And it has other like major social consequences on the country. And that's where the high taxes, I think, are one of the biggest disruptors for a lot of guys from wanting to live in Denmark. One of the differences on Europe is that unlike in America, most people pay some kind of tax.
What would your life be like if you
we
didn't
obviously
have to worry
know in the
about
U.S.,
medical
a lot of
bills
people
or
don't actually
unemployment
pay any
or student
taxes. Even people who are lower paid in Denmark do pay some tax. Average Dane pays 45% of taxes, and the highest of that comes from income. 29% of the GDP of Denmark came from tax revenue. from all types of taxes put together. Taxes obviously are a big issue in a lot of countries. For MGTOW guys, it's a huge factor that it really disturbs a lot of guys and causes us to want to go to low tax countries, lower tax regimes. Like I said, not to endorse high taxes, but just to illustrate a point. Just remember though that unlike in like Canada or the US, a lot of the taxes actually go back into funding the country, funding the people of that country and society. It's not going to fund wars and conflicts in the Middle East and on social agendas and all these other things that we see in the US. It does go back to their own country. And not that that changes anything. I think it's just important to know, because even here in Estonia, like I myself, I get free transportation if you are a resident or citizen of Estonia on train or bus, you get free transportation. That's a benefit. I don't think in the US there's such thing as free transportation. And how's that paid? That's through taxes, tax revenue. That's an example. And there are certain other areas too where taxes it will benefit more of the people. Obviously the Danes, most of their education from kindergarten until through university is free. And in fact, a lot of the university students get a grant, like $900 per month living grant from the state to help fund their costs during university. I actually had a Danish friend when I was living in Chile, and I recall him mentioning this. And it really helps, especially for Danes that go and study in different countries where the costs are lower. They can easily fund their living costs and just study. They don't have to worry about other parts of life. And also remember here, people who say, oh, 45% is so high for an average Dane. If you add up the taxes that a lot of Americans are paying on, or Canadians, like not just their income, but like their other consumer taxes and highway tolls, all the taxes, property taxes, other homes, they're probably paying as much as an average Dane, if not more, honestly, if you were to add them up. Many Americans are probably paying actually like 60% in taxes, not just wealthy people either. So people who do mention that it's much worse in Scandinavia, having lived very close to the Nordic countries, I sometimes think there's a little more to that. Now, the parental leave, and for, as I mentioned before, for families, it's very optimal. You get up to 52 weeks of paid leave as a parent. That can be for the mother or father. That's the longest actually of any EU country. That's a very long time for helping raise the child. And it's also, of course, universal healthcare. Very good healthcare system in Denmark, and this covers like most of their cost. Most of the medical costs in Denmark are paid for through this universal healthcare, apart from medicine, which doesn't tend to be very high. It's a very good level of healthcare, because some of the socialized healthcare is actually very poor. They're getting healthcare, but there's other things that have to be paid for on the side, so it's not really totally free. As far as other aspects of Denmark, if we go back to their like taxes, okay, we'll look at like their income, social security, property, services, and just compare these to other neighboring countries. I'll just run through it. Like in Denmark, income tax rate average is 29%. Social security is 0.4%. Property is 2%. Services, goods and services is 14.8%. As I said, the greatest part of their GDP is from taxes. And this tax amounts to around 46%. That's what the average person is paying in Denmark. Compared to other countries, the totals in Finland is 44%. In Iceland, 36.7, Norway, 38.7, in Sweden, 44. Denmark obviously is very high overall for taxes, but like I said before, you look at the whole picture, the whole package, and they are certainly more efficient with how the taxes are allotted and how they're actually supposed to be funding different aspects of the country. I would say compared to other Nordic countries, they're doing a pretty good job. But if you don't want to live in a country, like many of us MGTOW guys, obviously we don't want to live in high tax countries, probably not the best option. If you have a family of kids or you're a Dane here, it's not necessarily as bad of a package as other places with high taxes. With what you get, I think it's pretty good. One of the things also, their stance on immigration and their stance on feminism, it's very good. It's going in the right direction. It has been going in the wrong direction for so long, but I think Danes are really waking up. There's been some really good documentaries recently on ways that the Danes are waking up and understanding that they need to promote self-nationalism within. They obviously were a country of invasion, like Estonia. Germany was one of the well-known invaders, of course, and that happened numerous times because Denmark and Germany obviously are combined, the two countries. In fact, if you go to northern Germany, the look of the people is very similar to the Danes, and even the words, you can look at the words and kind of see similarities. And so when you hear Danish, it's very interesting language. It kind of sounds like a Nordic form of German. In a sense, it's a very unique language for people who live in this part of the world. Most people could agree with me. It's a very unique sounding language because it kind of sounds like German, and then it kind of sounds like Swedish. It's very unique. Denmark, like Estonia, has had a history of invasion, and it makes them understand what having high rates of immigration leads to and how it impacts their country. And they understand that, especially when it's other non-European groups that are becoming the mass in that country. And this is a good direction. I think the feminism problem, unlike in Sweden, I think it is being handled a little better. Not as well as the immigration. But the tax rates is certainly a thorn for many guys here. At the end of the day, it really goes back to preferences and what you're looking for. Denmark is probably one of the better MGTOW countries of the Nordics, Scandinavia, but there's certainly things that need improvement. And give me your feedback below. Thank you.